Welcome back to the Trailblazer Pod. Imagine being a 19-year-old freshman in college. Your life should be about exploring new ideas, making friends, and enjoying the college experience. But for Maya, it meant something much more profound. It meant standing up against anti Semitism at Columbia University, facing hateful messages, and shouldering a responsibility that many her age wouldn't even think to take on. In this episode, Maya shares her journey of courage, advocacy, and navigating adversity. Let's dive in. Hey, good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
Good. I think you're the youngest person on the podcast, so welcome. And I'm 28 now, but for some reason I'm having a hard time realizing that I'm not your age and that I'm not like a sophomore in college. It's just very strange to me. But I will say though that it's really cool that you're so young and doing such incredible things. I'm so excited to share your story. So, we're going to talk a lot about your activism on campus, but I want to start with something that I do with all my guests, which is tell me a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, how Judaism played a role growing up.
Okay, so I'm 19. I'm a freshman at Columbia right now.
Wow.
My family is initially from Germany. I went to high school in Westchester. So I think for me, what instilled like very strong Jewish and Zionist values is my grandparents both being Holocaust
Mm-hmm.
survivors.
Yeah.
My dad's father was initially from Poland and he was brought to the Mauthausen concentration camp.
Mm.
And then he ultimately, after the camp was liberated, moved back to Berlin where he met my grandmother. And she spent 7 years during the war in the Shanghai ghetto. She was actually the
Wow.
last Jewish baby born in Berlin until after the Holocaust, which is a crazy
Oh my
statistic.
God.
Yeah.
Wow.
So growing up with that and spending a lot of time with my grandmother growing up, I think that really instilled these values in me.
Wow, that's incredible. I just got goosebumps because you don't hear those stories a lot. Something that I found really interesting is that you just mentioned your grandmother in Shanghai and you created My Shanghai Story.
I did.
Incredible. So basically, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a virtual platform to learn more about the history of the Jewish people throughout World War II, right? Which, by the way, I did not know a lot about before this. So can you talk to me about what that is and like what inspired you to start that?
Yeah, so when I was younger, I would hear a lot about it from my grandmother, and she was interviewed in a few books and things like that. But as I got older and started to actually understand what she
Mm-hmm.
went through, I wanted to research it and see what it was like. And I found that when I looked it up online, there wasn't really anything to
Yeah.
see. So I kind of made it my responsibility to create this platform for other people so when they want to educate themselves on it, they
Wow.
can. So I got to interview a lot of really cool professors and museum people and things like that.
Wow.
There was a visiting professor at the University of Virginia at the time who was from Shanghai studying Jewish literature. So I actually flew down to Virginia to meet with her, which was
That's
a
so
really cool
cool.
experience. And my dream is to one day go to Shanghai and see everything. I took Chinese throughout all of high school so I could like kind of bond with my grandma over it. But yeah, and that's what I hope it still is. I've been reached out to by a few museums recently asking if they can use some of the
Wow.
material, which is cool. And yeah, as long as it's
That's
just helping to
so
educate
special.
people. Yeah,
I bet your grandma like is so proud of you.
I hope so. I think she
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Like did you have a project in school or you were just kind of living life and thinking I didn't know much about this. I need to be the one. You said take on the responsibility.
I was in my Mandarin class talking to my Mandarin teacher about it, and I was like, oh yeah. She's like, why did you choose to take Mandarin? And it's so
Mhm.
random. I was like, oh, this happened, and she didn't know what I was talking about. So like, wow, like this would be a really cool thing to start so people could
Yeah.
just kind of understand it better. Yeah.
That's incredible. Well, thank you so much for doing that. Even me, I went on and I'm like, wow, I learned something new. I so thank you for doing that. We're gonna pivot a little bit. You're a freshman in Columbia.
Yes.
We're gonna talk a lot about post October 7th, but have you spoken to people or friends that have been on campus before October 7th? And have they shared with you if there was incidents of anti-Semitism? I think a lot has come up. Like I went to a Harvard event where they were talking about that these things existed throughout the years. It just wasn't as prevalent and talked about. So I'm curious
Mhm.
if the same was at Columbia.
So I actually got into Columbia 2 years ago and took a gap year
Okay.
last year. So, and when I had initially gotten in, I went to an event at UJ just on college anti-Semitism and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And Brian Cohen, who's the head of our Hillel at Columbia, came to speak at the event. And I talked to him. I'm like, look, like I'm coming to Columbia next year. I just wanted to learn more about the situation. And he said Columbia's campus has always been like a center for political discourse, which isn't surprising. There have always
Right.
been protests, so that wasn't really a concern to me. He did say, however, that there had always been 1 week a year called Israel Apartheid Week,
Really?
where that was like a prevalent issue that was heavily talked about. But at the end of the day, Colombia is still 20% Jewish. There's a
Hmm.
huge Jewish community. So I think while that was going on pre October 7th, it wasn't a huge deal.
Okay. Interesting. That makes sense. So, talk to me about what happened post October 7th. I know you just started your freshman year, but I'm sure you've been following this because you got into years ago. For those of us who have been underground and have not read anything, what was the situation like?
So starting on October 8th of 2023, there were immediately protests on campus, anti-Israel protests, pro-Palestinian protests, basically saying what Hamas did on October 7th was resistance, it was justified, and things like that. And that kind of continued throughout
Hmm.
that academic year. Things really escalated in March and April of 2024 when the
Okay.
encampment started, where these organizations on campus started camping out on the main lawns in campus. And it happened at many universities across the country, but Columbia specifically was very watched. I
Hmm.
think, especially because it's in New York and our campus isn't very big. So
Right.
the encampment was like right in the center of it. And that took place for 2 to 3 weeks where the administration really did nothing. And then things took a turn, I want to say mid April of last year, when people started breaking into buildings on campus. One of our campus buildings faces onto Broadway, so people who weren't students broke in from the other
Oh
side.
my God.
And that's when the administration started to step in and do something because students' safety was at risk.
What did they do? Can I, just curious.
So all classes were moved to virtual options,
Okay.
meaning finals as well.
Oh.
So that was crazy. And then they started having students arrested. These students, however, are now back on campus,
Hmm.
zero to no repercussions, and the academic year ended early, all of that.
Interesting. Wow. Wow, that's a lot. Okay, something that's interesting to me is that when you're 18, 19,
Hmm.
you just want to go to college and you want to have the time of your life, right? I'm remembering when I was 18,
That's
19, I
how
was just
I feel.
exactly. However, you said in an interview, and I'm going to quote you, I came hoping for the best, preparing for the worst. You knew what was going on and you still chose to come onto campus and like were prepared for the worst, and then you turned into this incredible advocate. How have you balanced advocacy with the demands of being a freshman and like living life?
So it's definitely been a lot. I feel like I wasn't anticipating doing all this advocacy, to be
Okay.
honest. I had filled out a form. Well, okay, let me take a step back.
Yes, tell me everything.
Um, Last spring, while all of this crazy stuff was going on campus, my parents and I had multiple discussions of is this still the right place for you to
Hmm.
go? Because even beforehand, my parents were a little weary of the anti-Israel rhetoric on campus and all of that.
Yeah.
So we went back and forth with it a lot, but ultimately decided that in not going, I would be letting these pro well, in not going, I would be letting these
Yeah.
protesters quote unquote win.
Yeah.
And at the time, I don't know that my parents necessarily with me, but they allowed me to make my own decision, and I think I made the right one. And I was a little nervous, so I signed up to be a fellow with End Jew Hatred that May, not really thinking anything of it. I was like, okay, here's something tangible I can
Hmm.
do. And I had heard back in August, and I thought it would be okay, like a lot of behind the scenes stuff. I get to school my second day of orientation. I get a text from Daisy, who's our campus
Hmm.
manager at EJH, saying, "Oh, like we're having a protest at Columbia tomorrow. I'd love for you to speak." And
Wow.
I am not a public speaker. Like before this that was not something I would
Okay.
normally do. But I was like, "Yeah, like oh, okay, I'll do it." And that's kind of where things started for me. I spoke at this event where we were protesting a mask ban on campus, where students who are involved in protests shouldn't be allowed to wear masks because they can conceal
Yeah.
their identities, not get in trouble. And then from there, everything kind of took off. In terms of balancing that with school, it was really difficult at first because everything was so new to me. I was living
Yeah.
not at home, I had classes, new friends, and then all of this activism stuff on the side. So that first week of school, I was doing interviews with like there was one night I did a
Hmm.
Fox News interview where it was midnight and I was sitting on my dorm floor in pajama pants
Oh my God.
talking to them. It's such a funny story. So I think a big thing for me was learning to say no to some stuff because I was
Mm.
still trying to balance classes and taking exams for the first time, and then also just picking and choosing which media sources I wanted to talk to. So like Fox News is obviously very conservative, and then I did an interview with Haaretz, which is obviously the very other opposite end. So just kind of
Yeah.
balancing out who I would talk to and things like that. That was also my parents helped me with that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then just making sure I had time to do social stuff, join clubs, everything else.
Wow. Okay, I did not know that you kind of just fell into it like an accidental activist because
Yeah.
I was all the videos you're talking about, I watched all of them. I watched your interview with the Fox News for research. You seem to know your stuff. You're talking like you have been planning to do this for your whole life. So that's amazing. And you're also I feel like being thrown into something like this really teaches you something. Like the way you just said, I had to learn how to say no. It takes people years and years and years to figure that out. So it's kind of what an incredible opportunity for you to do something you believe in, but also be faced with this, like these immense challenges that force you to kind of
hmm
figure out who you are and what you stand for.
I think also a really important piece of that is I had such a good support network.
Mm,
I mean, obviously, my family, everybody's super supportive, but then finding people at school to confide in about this
yeah.
stuff. I know there's a girl, Eden Yadigar, she's 3, 4 years older than me, and she was very big on speaking out at Columbia last year when everything was going on. So we connected at the beginning of this year, and she's been a super important point person for me. I reach out to her if I have
Wow.
questions, or so she actually gave me a lot of information. So I'm so grateful to have like mentors like her,
Yeah.
mentors like Shabbos Kestenbaum has been another person who I go to when I have questions for this
He's
stuff. So they've been
amazing.
so helpful.
So has the like Jewish community on campus like strengthened since October 7th, or has it always been? I know it's 20% Jewish, so I'm sure there's always been some sort of presence,
hmm
but for I just feel like after something like that happens, people come together. So has it like magnified?
So I think yes, our Hillel and our Chabad are amazing. I've spent so much time at both this past semester. The first Shabbat of the year, I went to Chabad for dinner. There were over 500 students.
Wow.
It was amazing during Parents' Weekend. So many students came for Shabbat. The one thing I think we struggle with a little bit is our Jewish community on campus isn't super vocal.
Mm.
So, as many students want to be involved, are very pro Israel, very strong Jewish identities. On October 7th, when one of these pro Palestinian groups on campus had a protest and we had to do our own little counter
Yeah.
protest, the amount of people that showed up to ours in comparison to theirs was tiny. So, even though there were people, it's not well represented in the media.
Interesting. That's a very good point. Also, we're already such a small nation, and
Exactly.
Israel is so tiny. So I feel like people like you who actually speak up are just an amazing example for the rest of us. I think, by the way, I'm wearing the sweater that says "Silence is not an option. Speak out against anti-Semitism," and it's by a friend of mine has this company that does incredible merch,
Wait,
and
I
I'm
love
wearing it.
it.
Yeah, I actually have a discount. I'm gonna put it in
Oh,
on the
send it
bottom.
to me.
Yes, she has a whole on-campus line, by the
Oh,
way.
very
So
cool.
yeah, it's incredible. So like people that are doing that are basically the trailblazers for the rest of us. I want to ask you because you mentioned end Jew hatred. For those of us who are online and have been, involved, know what it is, but I want to share what it is for those of us who don't.
End Jew Hatred is an organization that helps Jewish students, Jews everywhere, kind of point out anti Semitism and things like that. I mean, it's a very multifaceted
Mm-hmm.
organization. It also works with the Lawfare Project, which
Mm.
helps get like legal help to people who are victims of anti Semitism and things like that. For me specifically, they have a campus fellow program where you apply and they pick fellows, 1 to 2 from many different universities, who then come together and we have different like objects to kind of reach by the end of the semester, by the end of the year. Whether it's posting stuff on Instagram or tabling for pro Israel causes or things like that, EJH is behind it, even though we don't have a formal like club on
Mm-hmm.
campus. And even just the network that I've built through EJH has been amazing. We have a big group chat with all our fellows. If I'm
Wow,
ever having a situation like, oh, like, has anyone dealt with this? I get responses. Everyone's so
that's
amazing.
incredible.
And also, if there's anything I see on campus and I'm not exactly sure how to handle it or like what the proper
Mm-hmm.
protocol is, I reach out to Daisy, who's the campus manager. She's amazing. So it's also just like a reference point for me when I don't know what to do.
That's really cool. As much as like this would have terrified me freshman year of college, like what we talked about, it also is such a blessing because when you come into a college and you don't know what the hell you're doing, or at least I didn't know what the hell I was doing, finding my group of friends and finding my community, and you almost were like forced to find these people and you created this like amazing sense of community. So it's also a really beautiful thing. Do you agree?
100%.
Unmask the hate rally. And
Yes.
I want to pull out another quote because I think you said it so eloquently, and it was one of the end Jew hatred posts on Instagram. You said, when people can hide behind masks, they feel emboldened to spread hate without accountability. And we, the Jewish students of Columbia, are the ones who bear the consequences. I want to ask you specifically, what are the consequences you were referring to here that came from these people wearing masks and like hiding behind that?
I mean, probably the most extreme example is coming from last spring semester when these students were arrested or were supposed to get in trouble or expelled, and that didn't happen because they couldn't be recognized because they
Mm,
were covering their faces. There were no consequences for them. And these
wow.
students who did end up getting arrested then are back on campus now. And our interim president, Katrina Armstrong, actually made a statement when she came into like the presidential office this year saying that she apologizes to all the students who got arrested. So on a side note, you can see we have
What?
an issue in the administration. But that aside, even now, there was a protest, maybe it was the last week of classes, maybe about a month ago.
Hmm.
And when SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, our biggest like pro-Palestinian
Hmm.
organization on campus, which is technically banned, um, was
Technically.
planning said protest and they posted on Instagram, they said masks mandatory because they didn't want any students coming and then getting in trouble. So for us, the fact that these students have no repercussions is scary because
Yeah.
we don't know how to respond, we don't know how to react.
Wow. Okay, so in a literal sense, like hiding behind them made them not have any.
Literal sense.
Wow, okay, that's crazy. I'm curious, has anyone been specifically targeted? Because when you speak out against something, sometimes unfortunately individuals get targeted and called out. Have you or any of your friends experienced that?
Not in person. I feel like a lot of the
Okay.
time this happens on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of, like, I have been, a lot of my friends, a lot of other
Really?
advocates on campus have had that issue. I think that on campus, things are pretty calm in that sense because security is also at a
Mm-hmm.
maximum right now. There's security everywhere when you're walking around campus after last spring. So I think people are discouraged to say
Interesting.
anything in person. But
Okay.
I do, like, I will get DMs on Instagram basically saying, "Oh, like I know where you live," that kind of crazy stuff. And it turns out that these people are my classmates.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. So there's crazy stuff like that. We also have this app that we use on campus called Side Chat. I know it's big on other campuses as well.
Never heard of it.
So it's an app. I don't know if I would consider it social media,
Mm-hmm.
but it's basically if you have an email that like a columbia.edu email, you can
Mm-hmm.
connect to their server and basically post anonymously. And it's just a constant stream. And so that's a big place for anti-Semitism.
Oh my
It's
God.
wild, especially once again, people there's no repercussions because you can't see who's posting what. So
Right.
that's become a big issue.
That's crazy because now you're talking about social media as being a mask for these people because they can hide behind their screen. So they're using physical masks and they're using like,
And digital, yeah.
oh my God, that is crazy. I want to
Yes.
ask you, what strategies or initiatives have you seen that do work effectively in addressing anti-Semitism on campus, if any?
I mean, I think the upped security has been helpful because once again, people are discouraged to do anything that they might get in trouble for the most part. With that, we now have to scan in every time we access campus. So I feel like if there were a situation like last spring that happened, they at least have like a tracked count of who is on campus,
Hmm.
who scanned in at what time. Last year, another big issue was a lot of these within our lifetime people coming to campus, which for people who don't know, within our lifetime is just like the graduate program for students in justice in Palestine, and it's based in New York City. So
Wow.
last year during these protests, they would come in mass numbers. So the fact that there are no guests allowed on campus right now is also super
Okay.
helpful. And like it makes me feel safer when I'm walking around campus knowing that not just anyone can
Yeah.
enter. It gives me peace of mind. I think within our lifetime is still very dangerous. I have a friend who was walking outside campus with an Israeli flag last week who got punched in the face. Very crazy stuff.
Still?
Still, this was the last week of class, mid-December.
Oh my God.
Um, Crazy. But that I think has been helpful. I think the administration still has a long way to go. I don't think they've done such a good job protecting Jewish students, but at least the extra security is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, you're being very, very diplomatic about this. You're like, but I like it. It's always important to look at the stuff that are working and also realizing that in comparison, the stuff that are working is so much smaller than the stuff that's not working.
Yeah.
You touched upon the administration. If it's okay, I want to ask you a little bit about this because I mentioned I was at the Harvard event and they were talking about how the administration there did absolutely nothing in beginning and how terrifying that was for Jewish students. Can you share more about, I know they arrested some of the students, then they sent an apology, but what are some of the stuff that they didn't do and some of the stuff that they did do besides the security?
Yeah. So we had a new president last year, Manouk Shafiq. She resigned this August after everything that had happened last year, or lack thereof. Even though I wasn't technically a student yet, I was still on all the email lists and all that stuff. And there was zero to little correspondence from the school when all this was going down. So she ended up resigning, and now we have interim president Katrina Armstrong, and she was the one who first week of school sent out an email apologizing to the students who got arrested. Like, to my knowledge, all these students who got arrested last semester are now back on campus. There was little repercussion. The administration did somewhat ban SJP, which is Students for Justice in Palestine, from being on campus, which was a good thing, but at the same time, these students kind of just reformed this club under a different name. It's now CUAD, Columbia University Apartheid Divest. So while they did ban it and taking steps in the right direction, it's not. It's still there. And JVP, which is Jewish Voices for Peace, another organization on campus, arguably, in my mind, the more dangerous one, because it's not really Jewish students, but they say, oh, like, we're Jewish students, we believe all of that. So I think that's also dangerous because people will see that they're like, oh, if the Jews think this is happening, then we can too. So this club was also, during our club fair, still tabling. So I think the fact that the university says they banned it looks really good, but then they don't take the necessary steps to actually get them off campus. And then this year on October 7th, for example, we have 2 pro-Israel clubs on campus, SSI, Students Supporting Israel, and REA. And they had planned like a beautiful art exhibit for October 7th and just like a area for students to grieve and kind of understand what's going on. And then there came word of CUAD doing a huge protest. So while we didn't really want to counter-protest, we felt it somewhat necessary. So the weekend before, we have a group of staff and faculty for Israel who are honestly the most amazing people. They are so helpful and truly like unsung heroes. But they reached out to me. They're like, look, we need to plan this counter-protest. Like, we need a student to register for these spaces on campus, because now if you want to use a space for a protest, you have to fill out a form beforehand. So we did that. We literally filed for every single spot on campus. We're doing our counter protest, nothing crazy, basically just people saying stories of survivors from October 7th, different things that had happened. And the pro-Palestinian protesters come up next to us, didn't reserve any space, yet no repercussion from the university. And they came in mass numbers, started marching around campus, nothing happened.
Oh my God, so hypocritical. It sounds like it's like whack-a-mole, you know, like when you push something down and then it pops up in a different way. Like they're just morphing into these different groups and names and stuff and doing the same things. That's a lot to fight.
I do think that after last year, a lot of students are a little bit tired from this disruption. So campus has become quieter. I think the worst day we faced this year was October 7th. This was absolutely awful. There were lots of videos on Instagram, I'm sure you saw. Shai Davidai also posted a lot. Like, it was a big security risk. There were so many of these kids just marching around campus. It was very scary. But other than that, things have been a bit quieter, which is...
I love how you say it's been a bit quieter, but then like a few minutes ago you're like, oh yes, my friend got punched in the face. Okay. That is
Well, and the situation with that is because we are in New York City, it's a little more complicated because we
Mm-hmm.
have Columbia's campus, Broadway, and then Barnard's campus on the
Right.
other side. But anything that happens on Broadway isn't under
Right.
university responsibility.
Right.
So my friend, when he was punched all this, the university didn't do anything because it technically wasn't on campus and it wasn't a student who hit him. So
So they can just be like, go to the city police and,
that's what he did.
file.
He was like,
Yeah.
go to the precinct and file, and that was
Yeah.
it. Jew hatred database has been very helpful in like we didn't know who the person was, but we had a picture of him. They helped us identify him, so they've also been a great resource.
Oh, interesting. Can you talk to me about that database? I didn't know they have that.
So it's just on Instagram, and if you ever have an incident with Jew hatred,
Hmm.
anti-Semitism, any of the above, you can basically fill out their form, submit it with any information you
Wow.
have, and then they'll use their resources to like find that person, find their social media, their LinkedIn, like where they work, and
Wow.
all of that.
Okay, very cool. That is good for people to know.
Yes.
Have you encountered any unexpected allies or adversaries since starting this?
I don't know if I would call them unexpected. I think I spent a lot of last year when I was worried about school, like following these like Jewish celebrities in
Yeah.
my mind on Instagram who I've now gotten to be close with and have a
Oh.
relationship. So part of me is still like fangirling over.
Oh, that's amazing.
But they have been really amazing. Ari Ackerman, Lizzie Savitsky, all these people, they show up to all the New York protests at Columbia when they're around.
Wow.
And they've just been such huge allies on Instagram and things like that. Obviously, Eden Yadigar, Shabbos, all these people, for me at least, also super helpful in terms of like getting information
Yeah.
I might not know. Organizations, I would say EJH, obviously. Then there's Israel Campus Coalition, who's also a
Hmm.
super helpful resource to everybody on campus. And then obviously our Hillel and Chabad have been
Yeah.
fantastic. I'm trying to think outside of that, but those are mainly the allies that I can think of.
That's amazing. Like we were saying, social media is being used as a mask, but the other thing that came out is that social media is being used in such a beautiful way by these incredible people who are dealing with and facing all this hate, I'm sure, and they're still choosing to, be
A
advocates.
hundred
So
percent.
yeah, it's something that I'm very, very inspired by. Before I started this podcast, I did not have Instagram because
Oh,
I'm,
really?
yeah, for
Interesting.
four years. I was off Instagram since like
I wish I
college or
could do
something. Well, it
that.
was incredible. I loved it. It's taught me a lot. But when I came
Yeah.
on, I'm like, this is terrifying. But when I did come on, I was seeing all these people you mentioned and more. And I'm like, okay, this can actually be used for an incredible tool.
It's really hard sometimes when you receive a lot of hate, especially from classmates and DMs and comments on videos and things. It's really difficult. But then at the same time, I'll receive messages
Yeah.
from people, like just Jewish mothers from across the
Yeah.
country,
Oh,
asking if there's anything they can do. And that truly is such motivation to continue doing
wow.
this. Yeah,
As long as the like light,
exactly.
balances out or like overshadows the darkness, that's what
Yes.
that's what really matters. I'm curious how you navigate, maybe with NGO hatred or just yourself, conversations with people who may not understand or agree with your perspective. Not everyone is like a Jew hater, right? Or like sending you horrible messages, but people are not necessarily educated in what they know. Have you ever been faced with a conversation like that, and like how would you go about it?
Yes. So, first and foremost, I always try to make sure I'm as educated as possible on whatever's happening. So that means like reading the news for a few minutes every morning,
Yeah.
listening to a podcast or two, trying to just understand the situation, and also diversifying where I'm getting information from. So,
Yeah, I
whether
love that.
it's reading like really right-leaning news sources or
Yeah.
left-leaning, or even sometimes if it's like looking at Al Jazeera or trying to understand a different
Yeah.
perspective. So, I think that's really important. It's also, I sometimes have to take emotion out of it if I'm having this conversation because obviously I feel very strongly about Israel. I have family there. I feel very strongly about my Judaism. But that's not always the most helpful thing
Right.
if you're trying to have an actual conversation or trying to educate somebody. So even last year, I would have conversations with friends of mine from high school where they would be like, yeah, like it was total resistance on October 7th and things like that. So I think that impacted a
Yeah.
lot of my friendships, but also just trying to have these
Yeah.
conversations with people where I'm truly just sticking to fact and not allowing my emotion to interfere, which is a lot
It's
harder
hard.
to
Yeah.
do than just say. But I would
Wow.
say just being as educated as possible because the last thing you want to do is misquote
Right.
information or say something wrong. So,
Yeah. First of all, you talk like you're in your 30s, 40s. No, seriously, you're so wise. It's like really, really impressive. I think being able to do that is a skill that not many people have. and we need more people like that. So I love that answer.
I think it's also, I'm no expert at it, and it's something that I work on all the time, and I think it's a skill that over time you can really build on.
Absolutely.
But you have to be willing to try.
Absolutely. One more thing. What do you think would policies or actions or ideas that would help the situation on Columbia, but all college campuses that are facing anti-Semitism?
Sure. So I think going on the EJH side a little bit, this mask ban, it's an issue on all campuses.
Yeah.
Like you look at these pro-Palestinian groups, pro-terror groups on campus, they always have their faces covered one way or another. So I think making students unmask and just like having repercussions for their actions is really important and probably the first step the administration needs to take in solving this issue. With that, I think making sure these groups aren't allowed on campus, which I understand in New York is difficult because they can always set up outside campus and things like that. But when it is on campus, it is their problem and it's something they need to deal with, and just seeing to that, even if it changes their name, like just being more proactive. I think the social media thing needs to be looked at. I don't know how much sway the school actually has in that situation, but there does need to be something done about it. I think this is less for the administration, but people often ask me, what can I do to help on campus? I think the biggest thing is for people who went to Columbia or any of these other schools facing mass amounts of anti-Semitism, if you're looking to give a donation, give it to Hillel, give it to Chabad, give it to someone who's willing to help the Jewish students rather than the university itself.
Yeah, very important. I think it's wildly unbelievable that it's so difficult to ask to come onto campus and feel safe. Like, I cannot believe that. Like, and the more I hear stories from people like you and people from Harvard alumni, I'm just like shocked that your opportunity for an incredible college, 4 years of college, is like almost taken away from you. So I'm glad that you found a way, like we talked earlier, to basically balance and still be a 19-year-old. I hope you are, because those years are like, they're you should cherish them.
It has been a net positive experience, I do have to say. Even though I struggled in the beginning with the balance aspect of it, I've been able to have a pretty good time.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that.
Yes, and I've taken cool classes and all that. So
Okay, amazing.
overall good.
Good. Last question. This is something that I ask all my guests is, what does being a trailblazer mean to you?
Ooh. So I don't know if I would describe myself as a trailblazer.
I would.
I mean, to me, it's honestly just following the Jewish values that I grew up with, standing up for what I know and believe to be right. I think, like you said earlier, not staying silent in this situation because we've seen how that ends. And I think ultimately that's also why I decided to stay at Columbia, because I wanted these great resources that this university could offer and not allow myself to be scared of these pro-terrorist groups on campus from me getting this great education. So I would say that's the biggest thing. I think speaking up, even when it's scary, even when it's hard, and just following Jewish values, Jewish beliefs, whatever that means to you, without, I think even just traditionally without religion being involved, just speaking up and following your heart.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much, Maya. This was really
Thank
a pleasure.
you. This is amazing.
And I'm really like inspired by you, truly. So keep doing what you're doing. We need more people like you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.